Is this it? Huh? What? Is this thing on? Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about 10 games that need a remake. I don't know, maybe 10 games that desperately need a remake. I don't know if I go that far, but yeah, you already know what it is. Let's get into it. Number 10. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. Okay, hear me out. This game was Mario's first foray into the RPG genre way back on the Nintendo 64, long before the Mario and Luigi saga, and about 4 years before the first entry in the Paper Mario series. And if this game didn't exist, we would have never gotten the absolute masterpiece of a sports anime tournament arc RPG whirlwind that is Mario Tennis Power Tour. But like actually though. And guess what? This game is really freaking good. The graphics and art design are emotive and expressive, bubbly and cute. The game itself is a turn-based JRPG journey with area exploration elements typical of the genre. The thing that sets it apart from others like it, other than being a Mario game, is largely the way that you navigate the game's mechanics, meaning the action menus. Rather than a long list of things you can do cluttering a text box that you have to scroll through endlessly to find what you want exactly, your actions are assigned almost entirely to the 4 face buttons A, B, X, and Y. This is a feature that is eventually refined in the Mario and Luigi handheld RPGs, becoming that series' defining feature. Along with that, there's a somewhat rhythmic aspect to the game where when you pick one of these action commands, you have the opportunity to do some timed button presses to increase the effect of the action. And there's not really a limit on this, it's mostly up to your own individual skill to time things correctly and stack them all up, which is a neat way to add player interactivity into powering up your moves and harken back to Mario's usual platforming antics at the same time. And speaking of the Mario and Luigi RPGs, that whole series got full remakes with expanded content on the 3DS, which does set a precedent which would allow Super Mario RPG to be remade for Nintendo's current consoles. Number 9. The Witcher. The first one. Everybody loves The Witcher these days, for good reason. Henry Cavill is... But what they might not know is that the first video game is plagued by a little thing called extremely clunky gameplay. It still has the same tactical thought process that the later games have. Plan around your enemy, make traps, drink your bombs, swing sword when really needed, fuck bitches. But the way all of that is implemented in this initial installment is unfortunately not very well implemented. While figuring out the game can be fun, and once you figure out how it really works, playing it is admittedly pretty engaging, overall the combat system in the first Witcher pales in comparison to the games that came after, often turning off newcomers who want to start at the beginning. And while you can rely on mods to make it look more in line with its sequels, a full remake would do wonders for the gaming world's first exposure to the man-meat that is Father Geralt. Number 8. Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3, otherwise known as Dragon Warrior. Every main series Dragon Quest title released up to Dragon Quest 8 has received at least one, if not multiple, enhanced ports or full remakes, except for the very first 3. Technically, these games all came out originally on the NES and then were remade for the Super Nintendo, but that's not much of an upscale in the grand scheme of things. In a franchise long renowned for remaking its games, it is very surprising that the originators have not yet received the same treatment, with all 3 being limited to mediocre ports on every console imaginable, including mobile phones. However, at the recent Dragon Quest 35th anniversary live stream, wow, that was hard to say, Square Enix announced that there is actually an HD 2D remake of Dragon Quest III or Dragon Warrior 3 in the works, apparently reminiscent of the beautiful and highly acclaimed Octopath Traveler's art style. I'm not entirely sure why they're working backwards here, but hopefully this is a sign that the first two games will also receive the same treatment in the near future. Number 7. The Longest Journey. The Longest Journey and its sequel, Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, are a pair of adventure games that were critically acclaimed during the early 2000s, developed by a Norwegian developer with plans in the works at the time to create several sequels and even an MMO. None of which ever came into existence, by the way. But somehow, despite that relative popularity, they faded to obscurity in the years that followed. These games are possessed of extremely interesting world building and lore, taking place in a pair of parallel universes, the technologically advanced Stark and the magically potent Arcadia, that the strong and well-characterized female protagonists find themselves traveling between. While the original creator eventually ran a successful Kickstarter that resulted in the episodic sequel Dreamfall Chapters, fully released by the end of 2017, that game was met with overall mixed reviews. In my opinion, remakes of the first two games and a full franchise bundle would be a dream come true.
Hiya, Wonkers.
Zoe, do you want to play a game?
Not today. I'm just not in the mood.
Oh, okay then.
Number 6. Fire Emblem: Genealogy of the Holy War and Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Or 776, I don't know, don't come at me, bro. Genealogy and Thracia are a great duology entry in the series, with the entirety of Thracia being an interquel that takes place in the time between two chapters, dead center in the middle of the Genealogy of the Holy War. Basically, the games are related to each other very closely. These games introduced several features that have become integral to the Fire Emblem experience, including the famed weapon triangle, romance and marriage, and having a second generation of characters to play with. These two games still look pretty good in the way that some SNES sprite work seems to never grow old, but neither of these important entries in the Fire Emblem franchise have ever received an official localization outside of Japan. There are great fan translations out there which are very easy to find, but that's not really the problem with these two games. The problem is the gameplay, which is largely dependent on RNG in a way that the games both before and after are not. Well, not quite as badly, at least they are all RNG, but these two are riddled with extreme difficulty spikes and uncontrollable randomness, something that is fine in manageable doses, even fun in many cases, but not to this extent. Oh my god. A remake seems necessary for these in my mind, since the three original Fire Emblem games that came before these two have all received them in some fashion, with the DS remakes of Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the New Emblem, as well as the 3DS remake of Gaiden, Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. These games this should happen. Make this happen. Number 5. Kadelka. The precursor to the amazing yet equally dead Shadow Hearts franchise, where the Shadow Hearts games more or less stand the test of time and would benefit from a short list of enhancements, graphical uphaul being primary. Kadelka is a clearly dated experience. Let me be absolutely clear. The story and aesthetic are, to this day, remarkable. You play as a Romani woman named Kadelka who has come to a small town in Wales in the late 1800s to investigate a medieval monastery that has been converted into a mansion, which is now currently overrun with grotesque monsters and is owned and operated by some questionable individuals. The game plays like a classic Resident Evil game on the surface. You walk around in a 3D environment with pre-rendered backgrounds and a fixed, deliberately anxiety-inducing camera. But once battle starts, the game transitions into a turn-based RPG with some minor strategy elements. Overall, a package bursting with cool concepts, though most of the ambition contained within is held back by the limitations of the hardware and the relatively high random encounter rate. Some new navigation elements, brand new voice acting, better pacing, rebalanced gameplay, and moving away from the old fixed camera Resident Evil exploration to a more immersive experience that is more in line with present-day adventure horror games, as well as a high-definition makeover, would turn this hidden gem into a modern masterpiece. Number 4. Xenogears. Regarded by many old heads as one of the greatest JRPGs of all time, Xenogears was initially planned as a sequel to the world-renowned Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger? I don't know, one of those. Becoming its own thing partway through production, Xenogears is the game that originated the tangentially related Xeno franchise, barely getting localized in the West due to its heavy religious themes and philosophically related story, a trend that has so far been very common for the entire Xeno franchise, with the Xenosaga trilogy and the original Xenoblade also barely getting localized. Xenogears has a great cast of characters with an incredibly satisfying main battle system and a unique take on the ATB, that's Action Time Battle system, though the Gears battles, the battles where the player controls mechs known as Gears, could stand an overhaul. I'm tired of running out of fuel. Unfortunately, the overworld camera controls are abysmal, the second disc of the game is an obvious rush job, and the story never really comes to a proper conclusion as the game never received a direct sequel after that rushed second disc, with the franchise instead moving on to separate series such as Xenosaga and Xenoblade. If Xenogears ever did receive a remake, I have a haunting feeling the gameplay would be altered to be more like a Xenoblade clone, which, to be fair, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I would prefer to see something like what they did with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, combining aspects of both what defines their franchise in a modern sense and the original features that made the original great. Number 3. Persona 1 and the Persona 2 duology. The majority of the Megami Tensei umbrella franchise that came out before Persona 3 and Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne could stand for a modern makeover. Hell, even Nocturne, still a good-looking and playing game, got a remaster within the last year. And while all 3 of these Persona games did get remakes for the PSP, only 2 of them made their way outside of Japan, meaning that half of the Persona 2 duology, as in the games are directly related, is outdated worldwide. And if we're being honest, all 3 would benefit from being brought up to speed with what the latter half of the series has become. The interfaces are annoying, the movement is tedious, the map navigation is bad, like most older Megami Tensei games, and the gameplay could use some major rebalancing. A fully remade collection with these 3 games, and maybe even Shin Megami Tensei, if the direct predecessor to the Persona series, would be a Persona fan's dream come true. And while we're being honest, Persona 3 and 4 could both use some work at this point. Might as well remake every Mega 10 game ever that was released before the 3DS came out while we're at it, and maybe then I'll be happy. Number 2. The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. The Legend of Heroes Trails series is one of the greatest franchises in all of video gaming, with the entire 10-plus game series having one overarching narrative complete with recurring characters and themes, awesome soundtracks, and just so much to go good stuff. Like, this franchise was unknown and underrated for almost its entire lifespan, with the first game coming out in Japan in 2004. I won't go through the tumultuous and fascinating history of Trails, but you can go check out Matt McMuscle's What Happened on the second game in the Sky trilogy, as well as Kill Scott Kill's overarching videos about the franchise, which I will link to in the description. And but I highly recommend going watching those if you want to know more. I couldn't decide if I wanted these games to simply get a remastered collection, like the new Kai versions of Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, which are Japanese language exclusive re-releases for the PC. You can buy them on Steam worldwide, but if you can't read Japanese, then good luck. Or if they should get the full remake treatment. While I'd be totally ecstatic and happy with the simple remastered collection, I find myself pining for a full remake. The thought that these games could be brought more in line with what the Trails of Cold Steel series and beyond look like visually sounds like a dream. Most of the main cast and important secondary characters have had their models created for Cold Steel appearances, so the majority of the work would be in recreating the entire country of Liberl and its citizens, reworking quests, and giving the game's voice acting, which they don't have, all of which is a very tall task. Especially if you know how many NPCs are in the game and weird dialogue and all that stuff. There's so much in these games as it is, but the idea of walking around Liberl in a more visually immersive, graphically modern environment is one that I just cannot let go of. Especially if some of the cut content from the third happened to be restored or reimagined. I would even go so far as to include Zero and Azure in this remake plan in hopes of both creating graphical continuity for the entire series and an official localization for the first time for those two games. For now though, much love to the Geofront crew who have done their damnedest to bring the two Crossbell games to an English-speaking audience. Link to that in the description below. Just a little addendum. During the writing of this video, the Geofront crew announced an official partnership with NIS America, the current English language publishers of the Legend of Heroes franchise, that will use their painstakingly crafted fan translation as the basis of an official localization for both of the Crossbell games, which is just insane, and I'm so happy that the Geo crew are associated with this. Misa is also bringing Nayuda no Kiseki, a spin-off game not related to any of the others, and the 10th game in the main series, Hajimari no Kiseki, known now as Trails into Reverie, to the West for the very first time. Number 1. Parasite Eve. The Parasite Eve games are iconic for many reasons. Parasite Eve was the very first rated M game released by developer and publisher Squaresoft, now known as Square Enix, as well as being a direct sequel to a science fiction horror novel by the same name written by Hideaki Sena. Parasite Eve is an action RPG, but not in the hack and slash mash buttons do cool moves kind of way that much of the genre is defined by. No. Rather, Parasite Eve is a survival horror concept reminiscent of the early Resident Evil games, even coming complete with the same tank controls and focused camera, combined with a gameplay system similar to the action time battles of the Final Fantasy games of the time, like Final Fantasy VII, except playing out in real time. So imagine that all together. An iconic Final Fantasy ATB battle system, but instead of turn-based, it plays out in real time, combined to a slower Resident Evil-style survival horror gameplay focus, with a story based on an award-winning sci-fi horror novel taking place in New York City. Oh, and don't forget the amazing soundtrack composed by Yoko Shimomura, who you might know from tiny little games such as Final Fantasy XV, Xenoblade Chronicles, and goddamn Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, these games are really good, but they're held back for the same reasons that make them great, especially the early Resident Evil bits. Something similar to the GameCube Resident Evil remake, or even the RE2 remake, would be the ideal for these masterpieces. And if they could make the third birthday, the unfortunate third game in the series, even somewhat enjoyable, I would call that a miracle. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I put a lot of thought into this one, and I actually really struggled to make this list. I'm a big retro gamer, particularly JRPGs, and I think a lot of the older games that I enjoy, I would like a lot less if they became something else or were forced to align more with present-day sensibilities. I've realized in the process of making this video that I'm more of a remaster kind of guy. I really like the idea of taking a classic and making it look a little bit nicer. You know what I mean? Adding a few quality of life features here and there. But overall, keeping the spirit of the original pretty much the same and releasing it to a much wider, much more diverse modern audience with more diverse palettes. But I really do think the games on this list would benefit a lot more from true remakes than simple enhanced re-releases. If you guys have any games that you'd like to see full remakes for, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'm very interested in seeing what you guys have to say, so, and, you know, maybe what other games are due for a second coming. And don't forget to let me know if you want to see more lists like this. Alright? You better. See ya. How do I turn it? I don't know how do I